941 here, Big 550, KTRS. Tonight? Is it tonight?
Tonight.
Tonight at Left Bank Books, our next guest will be there 7 p.m. for a book signing and a book reading. These are always fun. The book is called Valley Forge. Bob Drury joins us. Bob, thanks for joining us.
McGraw, thanks for having me.
Valley Forge. I thought we learned all this in junior high. We don't need to know anything more about Valley Forge.
What'd you learn, junior high? Here's 8th grade civics. It's a bunch of starving, half-naked troops sitting around the snow freezing, and Washington on a big white horse watching them freeze.
Yes.
That's what I thought Valley Forge was also until I got into it, and there's so much more to the story.
How did you how did you come to this? How did this pique your interest?
Believe it or not, it was a family affair. My half-French son got into a fight with his uncle about who bailed out who, and my son got the last laugh when he said, if it wasn't for the Marquis de Lafayette, you'd be Canada right now.
Aha.
And so I started looking at the Marquis, and Sarah Val, the inestimable Sarah Val, had done a book on Lafayette, so that was out. And I started digging. Tom and I, my co-author, Tom Clavin, we started digging into Valley Forge, and all these myths, small and large. It wasn't the coldest winter. There was plenty of food. They just weren't selling it to the Continentals with that lousy script. They were smuggling it into British-occupied Philadelphia to get paid in pounds sterling. There was, did you know there were 750 black soldiers at Valley Forge?
I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, it was the last time the U.S. Army was integrated, whites and blacks fighting side by side.
Up until 1945?
No, up until Korea. There were black units in World War II, but they weren't in the same unit. They were segregated units.
Okay.
But the biggest myth was that Washington, I mean, we look at him as if he's, Muhammad, Allah.
Right.
You can't say anything. This was an insecure man, and they were he was fighting a two-front war. One, militarily against the British. Two, politically against the Continental Congress, particularly the New England contingent led by John Adams, who wanted to replace him with Horatio Gates.
Wow, that's just the opening chapter of Valley Forge.
Yeah, right.
All right, tonight, Left Bank Books for a book signing, book reading. Bob Drury, how did you research this?
I went down, I got to give a shout out to the historians at the Park Service. First time I went to Valley Forge, I had done some research on my own, realized that in the winter of 1777-78, February to riff on T.S. Eliot was the cruelest month. I went down there in February and met the Park Service's chief historian, and we did a walking jeep tour, and from there he led us to the National Archives, to the Library of Congress. I actually hired my son, who's 21 now, speaks French, dual citizen. He went into the French National Archives.
Oh, wow.
And he did some research for us showing that von Steuben to you and me, was actually doing some spying for the French. Before the French got into the war, they wanted to know, did these crazy Americans have a chance? So they sent von Steuben over. Now, von Steuben also transformed the army. He transformed the Continental Army. The last letter George Washington ever wrote as commander-in-chief in 1783 was to the Baron von Steuben, thanking him for turning a bunch of disparate militias from different states into a well-oiled professional machine. So it was all journals, diaries. Now, of course, the officers all wrote, but we found things, enlisted men, Joseph Plum Martin. I remember specifically, it was one Christmas, he said, we were served a lamb stew with carrots, onions, and cabbage, without the lamb stew, the carrots, or the onions, or the cabbage. In fact, we were given a gill of rice and a gill of something to ward off. What was it? I forget. Vinegar. A gill of vinegar to ward off the scurvy.
All right, back up. So much more to get to. Is it true that if it's not for Lafayette, we would be Canada right now?
I would believe so. I believe the French had a lot to do with. You know what? Washington was so sick of Ben Franklin in Paris sending over these, I love this word, stop sending me these popinjays. The predominantly French officers were glory seekers. They had no English. They expected to be made a general the moment they hit shore.
Right.
Washington could not stand them. Lafayette was different. Washington saw something in Lafayette of his own younger self, the impetuousness, the thirst for glory, for battlefield honors. He considered him his surrogate son. When Lafayette was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine Creek, Washington sought out the surgeons who were attending Lafayette. He said, treat him as if he's my own son. So, yes, Lafayette, there were foreigners who were not popinjays. Casimir Pulaski, who set up the Continental Army's 1st Cavalry. Jacob de Cobb died at the Battle of Camden. Casimir Pulaski also died for our country. So there were some foreign officers, but for the most part, they were deadbeats. And
who was it that went back to France? It was during World War II and said, "Lafayette, we are here to."
World War I.
It was World War I.
It was the expedition, the American AEF, the American Blackjack Pershings, American Expeditionary Force. When they landed in France, Pershing himself led a contingent to Lafayette's grave, which, by the way, Lafayette, on his last tour of America when he was an old man, took a bag of dirt from Bunker Hill, and he told his son, spread it over my grave. When the Americans landed in France in 1917, Blackjack Pershing led a contingent to Lafayette's grave, and his adjutant, who was named Stanton, who was a great-great-nephew of Edward Stanton, Lincoln's Secretary of War,
right.
He stood over the grave and he said, "Lafayette, we are here. Lafayette nous ici." And when my wife read that in the first draft, she cried.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I must be doing something good.
All right. Bob Drury, New York Times bestselling author. Your last book, The Heart of Everything That Is. This book, Valley Forge, going to be at Left Bank Books tonight at 7 o'clock. How much Hamilton is in this?
McGraw, a lot of Hamilton. In fact, I don't even talk about Hamilton in my presentations.
Right.
I figured, you all know about Hamilton. If it wasn't for the play. Yesterday, at Politics and Prose, somebody said, it was my partner. He was there with me. He said, who knows who John Lawrence is? Now, John Lawrence is the founding father you never heard of.
Okay.
And the reason was he was killed. And who knows who John Lawrence is in this room? And there was maybe 50 people there. A teenage girl put her hand up. And at the end of the Q&A, I said, I have a question. And I pointed to you. I said, how do you know who John Lawrence is? And he said, from the play, Lafayette, Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Boy, if you don't like history after this book, right, there's something wrong with it.
Oh, man, it's just chock full of twists and turns, and it's got everything you want.
What about a movie? What about a TV show?
There's been talk. We'll see.
There's been talk.
There's always talk. There's always talk.
I'd give you money right now for all of this. Holy mackerel.
Well, who do you want to play? We're going to make you Von Steuben. Let me tell you one quick story about
Yes.
Von Steuben before we get off the air. He had one word of English. Well, I can't say it on the radio.
Okay.
GD.
Okay.
And what he would do, and his troops loved him because he would get down in the muck, in the mire, in the mud, and he would show them how to thrust a bayonet or how to put his ear to the ground to hear horses. They loved this in an officer. Every other army in the world, except for the Prussian army where von Steuben came from, they left that to the NCOs. It was below the officers. But von Steuben was a stickler for detail. And when he got angry, his face, and he was a portly man with a double chin, and his face would get red, and he would start cursing and swearing in German and French, and there was always a translator on hand, usually Hamilton, and he would yell to Hamilton in French, get over here and curse for me. And Hamilton would come over and translate his curses into English. But at the time this whole process was done, the Continental soldiers who were being trained, they were doubled over in laughter.
The book is called Valley Forge. Tonight at Left Bank Books, you're in for a treat. Bob Drury, thanks for coming in. Good luck with the book, and I'm sure we'll talk to you down the road.
McGraw, thanks a million.
9:50.